Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello everybody. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. So happy to have you tuning in today. Today we're continuing the theme of mood and behaviour and sleep challenges in kids with one of the most common conditions, challenges that we see here at Natural Super Kids when it comes to children's mental health, and that is anxiety. And I also want you to know that I am coming to this topic from both a professional naturopathic standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint. So as a parent, I understand how challenging it is to navigate anxiety in children. I just want to make sure that I'm sort of respecting my child's privacy here. So I won't sort of go into that too much, but I want you to know that, I know all too well the challenges that come with parenting a child that has anxiety, that that is on the anxious side. That being in a high state of alert from the moment that you wake up, wondering how the day is going to go. Are you going to be able to get them off to school? Searching their little faces for any telltale signs and wondering if this is going to be a good day, or if one small thing is going to set off that chain reaction of worry, of meltdowns, of loss of appetite, of school refusal, and sometimes, all of these things. And the guilt and the shame that we can experience as parents in this space and in mental health when it comes to our kids overall as well. Thinking, where did I go wrong? What should I be doing differently? Where did this come from? What have I done to cause this to happen? And, we personally are in a much better place than we were 1 year ago. But it's exhausting. And it can be really worrying about what the future is going to hold for your child when they are suffering with anxiety, and challenged with anxiety, not being able to do the regular things that kids do, go to sleepovers, go to camps, go to school, all of those things. And of course, anxiety really does present differently, so differently for different children, and also really differently in the same child through different stages. For me, I've experienced that, there's that real sort of fear, clinging on to the parent kind of anxiety. But then there's also that real sort of angry and, a different presentation of the anxiety that can come about sometimes as well. Like that's the word that I was searching for. That sort of distant and anger and meltdowns. It doesn't always come out or present as that kind of fear, those fear-based symptoms that we think about so often when we are thinking about anxiety. So it's such a complex area to be talking about. And I hope that this will help you to understand anxiety a bit more, understand some of the drivers that can really lead to anxiety in kids, and most importantly, some solutions that can work really well as well. So anxiety, as I said, is a really common condition affecting people of all ages. And in Australia, the stats tell us that 1 in 14 children will experience an anxiety disorder. And of course, there's a whole heap more that go undiagnosed. It is the second most common mental health disorder after ADHD, which some would argue is not necessarily a mental health disorder, but that's a whole nother topic. Anxiety is more common in females than it is in males as well. And look, the development of anxiety is multifactorial. There are all sorts of things that can lead to anxiety and anxiety symptoms in children. Some of those things include a history of anxiety or, particular genetics can make anxiety more probable in children, stressful life events, the changes in neurotransmitters or chemical messengers in the brain, a child's individual coping style and personality. And sometimes it's a combination of all of these factors as well. But we know that people with anxiety can find it really difficult to manage their feelings of worry, of stress, of fear. And to people outside of that particular person, it can feel like an overreaction. We can fall into the trap of saying, don't worry, everything will be fine, you're worried about nothing. But these things really are not helpful, because to the person that is struggling with anxiety, these fears are real and big. And when we dismiss them, it just can make things even worse. So as a parent dealing with a child with anxiety, we really want to try not to dismiss their feelings of worry, of stress, of fear. And when it comes to children and why anxiety is so common in children, one significant factor is the role of general brain development in children. So the brain is constantly rewiring and reconnecting itself. And in kids, this process goes from the back to the front, and the emotional center of the brain, the amygdala, starts to develop quite early. But the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for self-regulation and higher thinking is the last to develop. So this particular area of the brain can take until the late teens to early 20s to develop. So this means that a child's brain is already primed for anxiety because it's not fully developed. But despite this, there are still steps we can take to support kids if they are experiencing anxiety. And of course, not all children experience anxiety. So it's not a given, but this sort of what's happening in the brain development makes it more likely for a child to develop and experience anxiety. And as I said, anxiety is super complex. So there's a lot of things that can contribute and layer upon layer upon layer for certain kids that will make them more likely to develop anxiety. And things like, personality traits such as perfectionism. Perfectionist kids or perfectionist people are more likely to develop anxiety. There's things like the gut-brain connection that we want to consider, and I'll talk more about this. Medication use, so things like the oral contraceptive pill or illicit drug use can put teenagers and older kids at higher risk of anxiety. Screen time is a huge one. Technology use can have a negative impact on our health overall. And when kids are on screens, it's not just the detrimental effect of being on that screen, but it's also about what they're missing out on, such as time outside and spending time with family, that connection that's so important with anxiety, and being out in nature, which we know has a calming and anti-anxiety effect on a person as well. And linking to that is a lack of exercise. Exercise is beneficial for anxiety symptoms, and a lack of exercise can put our kids at higher risk of anxiety and other mental health conditions as well. The sleep quality and quantity that our children are getting. And this can be a bit of a vicious cycle because poor sleep can make you more anxious, and then anxiety can make it really hard to sleep well because all those worries kind of well up as we're sort of relaxed and going off to sleep. That's really common in anxious kids that, they start worrying a lot at bedtime when it's time to relax. So then they miss out on quality sleep. So then that doesn't help their anxiety. So as I said, it can be that sort of vicious cycle. And diet and nutrient deficiencies, metabolic issues such as pyrroles and MTHFR that we've discussed on this podcast before, all of these things can contribute to anxiety in children. And then there is, that difference between feeling anxious and having anxiety. We all feel anxious from time to time, and all kids will feel anxious and nervous and excited. Like they're all very similar kind of feelings, aren't they? But anxiety is an ongoing experience of symptoms over months or even years. And so some of the common symptoms of anxiety that kids can experience are that sense of worry that recurs or never fades, feeling nervous or on edge all the time, worrying about things that are small or even things that haven't happened yet. It's worrying about what might happen in the future. Anxious kids can have trouble sitting still or relaxing. They fidget a lot. They can get easily annoyed. They can be irritable. They can be angry. They will try and avoid situations or issues that they're worried about. For example, going to school or going off to school camp or, being away from parents can be really triggering for kids with anxiety. They can often get physical symptoms as well, such as headaches and stomach aches or tummy aches. They can have trouble sleeping. They can have vivid nightmares. Anxious kids tend to need a lot of reassurance. They need a lot of connection. It's one of the things that we really need to be nurturing in them, that connection. And a lot of anxious kids want things to be perfect, and they get upset if they're not. That kind of links into that perfectionism sort of personality trait that's really common in anxious kids. And when it comes to supporting our children with anxiety, I've already sort of talked about the fact that we want to acknowledge their feelings and their fears. We don't want to dismiss or ignore them. And I can talk from experience that this one is a really challenging balance to get right, but encouraging our kids to do things that they're anxious about. Sometimes it's just easier to let them stay home and not go to school or not go to that sleepover or that party or whatever it is that they're anxious about. But also, if we can encourage them to go, then it can really help to, increase that circle of comfort, get out of that comfort zone. And then that makes the comfort zone bigger because they get more experience in doing that sort of thing. But yeah, it's a really tricky kind of line to balance on. It's also really challenging to know when to step in, when, and this is very much dependent on their age, but when do you step in and, help them work through something, and when do you let them kind of, navigate something on their own? This can be a really tricky balance as a parent with an anxious child as well. We want to praise them when they're doing something or they've done something that they were worried or anxious about, and remind them that, you're okay. You did it and you're okay. And next time is going to be easier. Avoiding the situation that you're anxious about, the thing that you're anxious about, is not going to help you get less anxious. But as I said, this can be really tricky. And we want to try and avoid labeling our child as shy or anxious. We can sort of do that to help protect them. Oh, they're just shy or they're a little bit anxious. But when they're hearing that over and over and over again, it's not always helpful. So the conventional approach for managing anxiety in children really comes down to two things. If you take your child to a GP and want a solution for anxiety or are looking for answers as to what you can do. Usually the first step would be some sort of psychological support. It could be cognitive behavioral therapy. You'd probably get a referral to a child psychologist, but child psychologists have got really long waiting lists here in Australia. It can take you months and months and months to get in. And our personal experience with a child psychologist after waiting months to get in was not a great one. We didn't find it very helpful. And so, a counselor can be really helpful. And I'm a huge fan of, that psychological counselor support, paired with, a naturopathic approach. Because the other thing that really comes up with kids with anxiety, especially if the anxiety is severe or unresponsive, is medication. And we want to try and avoid, anti-anxiety medications in our kids if we can, because there are so many other things that we can explore. And so that combination of psychological support and looking at some of the driving factors and things that we can do to address anxiety from a naturopathic, holistic standpoint is what I recommend. So you want to be looking at, are there any underlying triggers? Are there any metabolic issues? Are there any genetic predispositions? Are there nutrient deficiencies? Is there an imbalances in gut health, which can play a big part? Are there food intolerances? And so to explore all of this, you really do want to work with a practitioner to uncover what might be going on in terms of underlying triggers for your particular child. But we can also be working on some foundational things in the meantime. So we want to be looking at our child's diet. It's huge. We want to be really, there's a lot we can do here. But for this episode, I want to talk about the fact that we want to move away from so many processed, packaged, sugary, refined foods towards more of a whole food diet, or more of that sort of Mediterranean style diet, which has been shown in the research to benefit mental health, including anxiety, depression, and that Mediterranean style diet it includes things like a high intake of fruits and vegetables, good quality protein, quality essential fatty acids, whole grains, limiting the starchy grains and the starchy grains, and the refined carbohydrates. And just by doing this switch, getting more of those whole foods in, ensuring that our kids are getting adequate levels of protein can be so helpful and make such a big difference. If our kids' blood sugar balance is all over the place because they're eating a lot of sugary, starchy, carby, processed foods, as so many kids do, then that is not going to help with those feelings of anxiety when their blood sugars are up and down. That's going to contribute to those feelings of anxiety. So diet is huge. We want to be minimizing those processed foods, the sugar. Sugar actually affects the dopamine receptors, which can throw off the balance of neurotransmitters in the brain. And as I said, it also contributes to fluctuating blood sugar levels. So we want to be, really looking at our sugars, our child's sugar intake, and minimizing that as much as possible. The other thing we can do in the diet is add in fermented foods. Now, this brings me to this topic of the gut-brain connection. So fermented foods such as, fermented veggies, sauerkraut, fermented carrots, coconut kefir, there's all kinds of fermented foods. But fermented foods have been shown in the research to be associated with lower levels of anxiety in teenagers. And so including more of those fermented foods in the diet is always going to be a good thing, not just for our kids' mental health, but for their gut health and their overall well-being as well. And this area of the gut-brain connection is so interesting. I've talked about this on the podcast various times, but just to reiterate this, if you've never heard me talk about it, the gut and the brain talk to each other. The gut microbes talk to or communicate with the brain, and many of our neurotransmitters are produced within the gut. And so if we've got a good, robust gut health, we've got a nice, diverse microbiome, then that is only going to do good things for our kids' anxiety, their mental health, their brain health, in so many ways. So we really want to be looking after the gut. And we see in so many kids with anxiety, they also have digestive issues, whether that's sort of IBS type symptoms or bloating or tummy aches. And sometimes, yes, the anxiety can lead to those yucky, uncomfortable feelings in the tummy, but often also the imbalance in the gut that's leading to those digestive symptoms can be contributing to an imbalance in the neurotransmitters that can lead to mental health kind of challenges like anxiety and even depression. So we want to be really looking at that gut health and taking care of it as much as we can, and fermented foods regularly in the diet, and probiotic supplements can really help when it comes to anxiety. And you want to be considering nutritional supplements if warranted, if nutrient deficiencies are involved. And things like magnesium, B vitamins, omega-3s, zinc are all really useful nutritional supplementation or supplements that can help to correct anxiety and manage anxiety. But again, you want to be working with a practitioner to determine which supplements are going to be best, which are needed, what dose that your particular child needs, and also, the best quality supplements that are really going to be helpful for your child. So we've talked about diet and nutrients and that gut-brain connection. Sleep is also really important. So if your child does have sleep issues, if they're a restless sleeper, if they have a lot of nightmares or vivid dreams, if they have trouble getting off to sleep, if they're waking through the night regularly, you just feel like they're not getting good quality sleep, they're waking up tired, grumpy, irritable, then, getting some help around getting that child into deeper sleep, supporting that deeper sleep, supporting good sleep can make the world of difference when it comes to anxiety. And then there's the other lifestyle factors. We've sort of already talked a little bit about this, the screen time, the exercise. I just want to share some research that was really interesting that I was reading. So children who spend longer than 2 hours in front of a computer or TV screen are more likely to suffer psychological difficulties regardless of how physically active they are. And that's 2 hours in a 24-hour period in a day. So I think, most kids are probably surpassing that 2-hour mark. So that's something to consider. And the other research piece that I was reading was talking about the fact that recreational screen time was negatively associated with mental health, and screen time may be associated with a range of negative mental health outcomes, and non-recreational screen time had no association with mental health. So that was really interesting as well. And as I was saying before, it's not just that time on the screens, but it's what they're missing out on because they're on the screen so much. Connection, conversation, time outdoors, active time. So there's so many reasons that we want to be thinking about minimizing our kids' screen time. And I know this is tricky. I have 2 teenagers. I'm not going to say I'm perfect at this at all. But we really want to watch that screen time, particularly if our kids are anxious or have mental health issues. And then, the adverse, the opposite of this, spending more time outside, active. We know that exercise is so good for the balance of feel-good neurotransmitters in our brain and our system. So exercise helps us to feel good and will really help to reduce those feelings of anxiety, those symptoms of anxiety. And if we can exercise and get our kids out into nature, that is really helpful as well. Spending time in nature really does act as a balm for busy brains. And it's such a good it's so good for stress, but when it comes to anxiety, a lot of anxiety is just that really overactive, busy brain, and nature can really help to slow down that brain activity. So active time, outdoor time, spending time out in nature, I can't stress highly enough how important this is when we've got kids that have anxiety. It really does make a big difference. And lastly, I want to talk about mindfulness. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but really when you think about the nature of anxiety, it's worrying about things usually that haven't happened yet or, that are in the future. And so if we can bring the mind back to the present moment and encourage our kids to do that, it can really alleviate anxiety, and to help them with little exercises that can bring their mind back to the present moment can really help to dissolve those anxious symptoms, particularly when they're in a really wound up state and feeling, really anxious about something. So there's so many resources that can help kids of all ages practice mindfulness, and you can, look them up online. One thing that I find really helpful for myself and when I'm supporting my kids to kind of be more mindful is to think about the things that they can that are present right now. So it's really helpful to talk to kids about their senses. Just tell me 3 things that you can see, and tell me 3 things that you can hear, and tell me 3 things that you can feel right now. And going through all of the senses like that can be really helpful. And you can do that no matter where you are. You can be driving in a car and you can be talking your child through that. And just, looking or looking at something in detail, a flower, and tell me about exactly what, this flower looks like. Look at the tiny little petals and what color are the big petals, and what color is the stalk. So there's some really helpful little mindfulness tips, but that is certainly not my area of expertise. But just helping kids come back into the present moment when they're struggling with anxiety can be super helpful, and focusing on those senses can be great as well. So I will leave it at that. I mean, I could talk for hours about anxiety, but hopefully that gives you a really good kind of overview of some of the things that we kind of look at from a naturopathic perspective, as well as a bit of a personal insight from, my experience supporting kids through anxiety. I hope it helps. Let me know, reach out to me on Instagram at Natural Super Kids, and I'd love to hear from you about how you found this episode and what you found most helpful. Thanks so much, and I'll be back next week. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it.